Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. Now, this is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the news stories and how they're being reported. We have a special edition of the programme today as we consider what has been a really busy news year here in South Africa and across the continent. And we also think about the year ahead. And please don't forget to engage with us on social media using the following hashtag SABC Media Monitor. 2019 has been a busy year for most journalists and editors in their newsrooms, working on various stories ranging from politics, sports, health, social and other stories. Now, some of these controversial stories have put the media's credibility under the spotlight and also put them under criticism on how they handled some of those stories. Media Monitor visited print and broadcast editors to hear their views on some of the top stories for the year 2019. This is what they had to say.
The top stories for me for 2019 must include at the top of the list the very public implosion of the Democratic Alliance. So that story starts with the DA failing to improve on its own performance in the May 2019 general elections, and that being followed by the humiliating public resignation of the leader of the DA, the former leader of the DA, Musi Maimane, and a couple of other senior people in the DA. And of course, just on the back of that was Helen Zille returning to the DA as the federal chairperson, which move then triggered the resignation of Herman Mashaba, which move also further triggered the kind of action that we've seen in the metros, the Johannesburg Council and the Tshwane Council, the outcome of which was that the ANC, through the person of Jeff Makubo, then ascended to the position of mayor, with the DA losing or failing to replace Mr. Mashaba. So what this whole thing did for the DA was to expose the fissures within the party around the issue of race and the issue of transformation in the country. But most importantly for me, it was also about the issue of what the DA would like to be. Is this a party that wants to deny that we as black people have a particular history in terms of which we suffered subjugation and oppression, and that you can't then post 1994 want to proceed as if that history is not there? So how do we atone? How do we help those who are subjected to this system deemed crime against humanity, to play catch up on many fronts, so for me that's one of the stories. The other story is the CR17 campaign funding. Remember, we had the details that were leaked about how much money was contributed into the campaign that saw President Cyril Ramaphosa catapulted to the position of president of the ANC in 2017 at Nazareth. So what that did was, confirm what we South Africans have always known about how much or the corrosive nature of money on South African politics. And so it wasn't just for me what is happening in the ANC, but it left many questions, certainly in my mind, but also in the minds of many, about how is money being used, not just in the presidential campaign, but in many different campaigns, including for parties outside of the ANC. In the DA and elsewhere, publicly people will say to us, no money is used, but how do people lobby? How do people campaign? What do they use to, convince each other? Is it the force of argument, or is it, this is what I have for you kind of arrangement?
I would say this year's top stories will definitely be the elections, which were everyone was expecting to see what's going to happen with the elections. It's been for a number of years since the last general elections in 2014. There was this view that maybe there may be a change of government, or we will now enter into coalition politics at national level, having seen that happening in 2016 with the local government elections. So for me, that was a big story, because it showed that as much as the ANC had declined in terms of support, opposition parties had not grown strong enough for them to be able to push the ANC under 50%. And it is a big story going forward, because it tells you, just looking at some of the municipalities and how parties perform there, that the opposition is not guaranteed to maintain their control of Tshwane, or of winning Port Elizabeth, or of winning Johannesburg in the next elections, if we look at what happened with this election, because then the ANC climbed back. But that the ANC is a weakened party is quite clear from the results of the elections. The trend of it declining in urban areas and maintaining its control of rural areas also continued. So for me, it was a major political story. Linked to that was a story about the DA as a political party, because from the time it was set up with the amalgamation of the Democratic Party and the New National Party back in the early 2000s, the DA has always been growing with every election. And there has always been this assumption that the DA is working towards getting at least 30 to 40% of the vote by 2024. So this election was supposed to be showing that direction. The party declined in terms of its support, and as we all have seen, what happened after that is that we saw a change in leadership that was not expected. I mean, the last DA Congress, if I'm not mistaken, was in 2018. Musi Maimane was re-elected unopposed as leader, and then we get to 2019, it doesn't even finish the term. So that for me has been the second biggest political story, which is linked with the fact that you saw a party like Freedom Front Plus, which was a political party that all of us assumed was dying, suddenly gaining support from white voters, and all of that was linked to the issue of land restitution and expropriation without compensation. Moving from the political front, it is still political, but it is more in terms of government and governance. It's the story around parastatals, especially Eskom, because Eskom has been a major problem in 2019. And there's always been this belief that the problems of parastatals, especially Escoms, would decrease with a change in government. So everyone assumed that most of the problems were as a result of the Zuma administration, that the Zuma administration was badly handling the Eskom crisis. Under President Cyril Ramaphosa, everyone or most people had an expectation that there would be some sense of agency, there will be strategies to make sure that we don't have load shedding. Yet just before the elections this year, we saw South Africa being plunged into darkness, and we are in that state even now as we come to the close of the year. So it just shows you that even with a new administration, you're still having serious problems in terms of government handling the ESCOM issues. And then in sports, I will say obviously the biggest story has been the Springboks, which everyone expected that the All Blacks were going to win the World Cup. They seem to be very dominant, and the Springboks fought very hard. I had actually thought they would go all the way to the semi-final. I didn't see them in the final, and yet they won the World Cup. And the reaction of South Africans to that, I mean, the spirit, the country has had experienced a lot of negativity over the last few months, and it looked like, in terms of the debates that were going on in society, that South Africa had become a polarized country, that we are not finding each other at all. And yet when the World Cup happened, there was that spirit of South Africanness that we had not seen in a very long time coming back to the fore. Whether we are going to keep that in the years going forward, I'm not sure, but it's something that as a society we should be working on.
I think the state capture, certainly, it is still a big story. Now the question is, what has transpired at the state capture? Will there be a proper follow-up in terms of people taking responsibility and prosecutions? But clearly it was a big story, and not only in South Africa, but around the world, on the continent, around the world, because multinational companies are involved, and some of them have been implicated, and we expect them to respond. But of course, the prosecution, that must follow.
Let's take a break now, and remember, you can talk to us via Twitter, and you can use the handle @SA Media Monitor. Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor, and we continue to reflect on some of the big stories that made headlines in 2019.
2019, I think there have been quite a number of them. Look, I keep going back to the Zondo Commission. We have seen President Jacob Zuma appearing before that commission. There have been a whole lot of stuff that has come out of the commission. So I would say the Zondo Commission really has been the big story for 2019. ESCOM, or ESCOM should I say. ESCOM has been the big story for 2019. We've seen for the very first time hitting stage 6. Incredibly unbelievable. Look, I mean, just as I was listening to some of the reports, one of the mining giants, each time they have a shutdown as a result of power, they lose over 100 million, and that's a lot of money. So now, if you look at what we are trying to do as a nation, is to make sure that our economy continue to grow. As you grow the economy, you are also able to create jobs. So there has been a big knock on that front. So yeah, I think those have been some of the stories, which also, by the way, have a potential to still become or remain big stories going into 2020.
Unpack that for us. What stories? You've touched on ESCOM, you've touched on the Zondo Commission. So unpack as to why you think those stories might carry through to 2020.
So
the report is coming out.
Yeah, so the report is going to come out. We are going to obviously see who are the people that are implicated. What action is it going to be taken against those that have been implicated? So obviously that on its own translates to what I would call running stories. Then they continue. Out of that, there will be a lot of information, a lot of stuff that's going to come out of that, and that on its own, without doubt, will make headlines in this country. ESCOM, I think it's going to continue to become a talking point. As a matter of fact, as we speak now, there are so many theories. Are these technical related problems? Is it man-made problem? So those are some of the things that, as a matter of fact, as we move forward, there is definitely going to be a lot that will come out of that. You can imagine if we continue with the current situation, if we go to stage 6, shutting down power for 12 hours, which is half of a day. What does it mean to that businessman, whether big or small? What does it mean to our economy? What does it mean to those jobs that we still want to create? Our young people that are in their large numbers who are today unemployed, where are those jobs going to come from if companies continue to lose money like it has been the case, like what we have seen in recent days?
From a tabloid point of view, I think 2019 has been the year of the tiger. But also, I mean, if you want to look at other more interesting and more fun kind of things, Our Lady Zoe, Miss South Africa, who has in the last week of 2019 ascended the throne as Miss Universe. I think she has done spectacularly well. I'm so proud of her. I'm so proud of her representing us, and I'm so proud of what she represents herself. Because the idea of beauty, what constitutes beauty, is redefined, not just here in South Africa but across the world. That you need to have straight hair that flows to your neck and shoulders, and she changed all of that, and I think that's a very important thing to note.
You also have a very important story in South Africa, not a good story to tell, the issue of violence against women and children. I mean, many women were killed this year by those that they knew very well, and it is a serious problem. South Africans going out trying to deal with this matter, but it looks like we have lost the battle. We are hoping that next year better strategies will be adopted to ensure that we deal with that kind of a challenge.
More than just being world beaters, the thing for me that really is inspiring is the stories about the various individuals who constitute the team. If you look at our captain, and where he grew up, and him being in Japan and hoisting that Webb Ellis Trophy, it's a message that sends. It's an act that sends a message to young people, black and white, in the villages, in the suburbs, in the townships across our country, that it's not about where you are born, that your circumstances don't have to define where you end up. You can rise above anything that is put before you and become a world beater, and that for me is really quite a great thing.
So whilst 2019 might have been a really busy news year, we went out on the streets to find out from the public which stories that they didn't want to see coming back in 2020.
I don't think there are any stories I don't need to hear next year. We have a problem with gender-based violence. We need to continue with that. We have a problem with racism. We need to continue talking about that. We have a problem with corruption. We need to continue with those things. So until those things are solved, we need to talk about them.
So do you think reporting about gender-based violence makes any difference?
I think it's better than not doing anything.
So man, the one thing really that I would say I really don't want to hear about as of next year that needs to stop, like really, which is very bad, or rather a lot of people are affected by it, or rather don't see it just because it hasn't happened like next to them. I would say it's women abuse, man. It's very bad out there. A lot of people are getting abused, a lot of women are getting abused, a lot of kids are getting abused, and man, it really needs to stop. As of next year, it's something I don't want to like again get into a new year and then only to find it's still there. I mean, by all means possible, we need to cut it down, man. That's what I feel really needs to stop. As of next year, 2020, we don't need it. Women abuse needs to come to an end.
Things that I don't want to see next year is like things like kids being raped, women being beaten up, or women being killed, women being killed in a brutal way, like a woman being burnt to death. That's a painful thing. I wish that all men can grow up and learn to take responsibility. Let's learn to groom all young men, and even us who are at my same age. Let's learn to be responsible. Let's build a community. Let's build a new South Africa. Last thing that I don't want to see next year is like our economy going down. We are pleading with the president to come down and also listen to us.
With the media, they only attend the scene and they don't have much time to like have a debate or interview different groups of people. They only interview maybe a group of people that have the same perspective. So I think they need to move around and interview almost everyone, including the foreigners as well. I think there'll be balance. There'll be a proper covering of what's happening in the country now.
After the break, we continue with Media Monitor. Although there are challenges that are slowly eating away at the credibility of the media industry in the country, there are those who are raising the flag, doing some top investigative journalism in the country. And we caught up with media analyst Shamano Makadi to find out more on the importance of investigative journalism and how he thinks the media can improve and invest more.
Look, there were a number of issues that played out in the media space. Perhaps maybe one could sort of talk about some of the concerns that were genuinely so raised by ordinary people. Some of these issues were also raised even at the state commission, as in the Zondo Commission. Just to give one example, it was really more to do with verification of sources, a situation where a journalist might have gone and write a particular story without verifying or double checking the facts, and it would then later turn out that the email that was believed to have come from this particular source in actual fact did not come from that person. It was a fake email, and as a matter of fact, it caused a lot of talk, and there was also a lot of doubt. But also what we also need to keep in mind is that media plays an important role. So you don't want a situation where people, and as an ordinary people, they begin to doubt what you report about. So we have seen some of those, and there were a couple of them. Some media houses have gone to the extent of apologizing for some of the stories that were actually not reported accurately. So that has sort of taken, I would say, a big knock in the entire industry. But I'm one who still believes that journalists play an important role in our country, and there are really good journalists in this country, good publications that are doing really fantastic work. So we cannot, as a result of maybe just one rotten potato here and there, and sort of brush everyone with the same paint.
Talk to us about the successes that you've noted in 2019.
Wow, there have been a number of successes. If you were to talk about the Zondo Commission, for example, if you were just to talk about the Zondo Commission and how it was established, it was the media that kept reporting on some of the, some of those stories that include what is today known as, state capture. The Guptas, amongst other issues that have been covered extensively. So that, for me, I think was really a great success of media's contribution in our democracy, which is, by the way, still very young. We still have a long way to go, and media in that mix plays a very important role. And of course, that role would encompass, amongst other things, to expose, to make sure that people, especially those that are in power, they account for certain things. Today we are sitting with, maybe we'll get to that at a later stage, but we're talking, ESCOM. Load shedding is a very big issue in this country. A lot of stuff has been reported along those lines in as far as investigative journalism is concerned. I would say journalists have to understand that there's a lot of expectation, lots of responsibility, and that goes with trust. We must earn our people's trust. We must earn ordinary people's trust, and that, for me, I think is very important. So those are some of the things that, moving forward, we've got to be thinking about these things, very seriously. It's not really just a matter of having a deadline and you simply just want to get the story out of the way. You've got to do your research and make sure that those sources are verified. There are lots of implications when it comes to, some of these stories, and also the manner in which they are reported. So going into 2020, that cannot be, overemphasized. It's a need. It's a necessity. We've got to make sure that journalists understand their role. By the way, the role of journalists cannot be understood with a role of politician. Journalists are not politicians. Journalists are supposed to do what journalists do. Yes, you will have, for example, sources, and these are people that you want them to trust you. These are people that whenever you have a story, you want to always go back to them and say, this is what we are working on. But that doesn't translate into friendship. That I must say, it has been flagged as one of the problems in our country, which I do believe that as we move forward, it will be resolved.
It's time now for us to go into our news archives, and this is where we go back in history and see how the SABC covered one of the major stories of the year. Let's take a look.
Certain cheap brands of vodka, cane spirit and brandy on sale in the Western Cape have been found to be laced with more than 50 times the safe limit of industrial and pharmaceutical alcohol. Police are concerned about the long-term effects on drinkers who can suffer kidney and eye damage as a result. Ed Herbst reports.
Police raided a Cape Town bottling plant after receiving complaints from members of the public who had bought alcohol at city liquor outlets. 65 drums containing methanol were confiscated. The legal limit for alcoholic beverages in this country is 2,000 milligrams of methanol per litre. 6 different brands of cheap brandy, vodka and cane spirits were analysed by the Department of Agriculture's laboratories in Stellenbosch. The tests showed that they contained between 17,000 and 113,000 milligrams of methanol per litre. In the latter case, more than 50 times more than was considered injurious to health. The masterminds of the bootleg booze scam evade excise duty of 120 rands a case by using cheap industrial or pharmaceutical alcohol. In some cases, raw methylated spirit without the blue dye has been used to top up the alcohol content. A police spokesman said the scam involved more than just fraud. In this case, lives were at stake. and he hoped the courts would take an equally serious view. Ed Herbst, SABC, Cape Town.
Let's take a break now, and remember, you can talk to us via Twitter, and you can use the handle @SA Media Monitor. Now, one of the regular features on the program is hearing from our journalists across the continent. And we asked some of them what they thought the top stories in their countries were in 2019. Okay.
The big story for me was the passing on of the former president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe. The other big story was a transition from Mugabe to Mnangagwa. People were hopeful, but unfortunately, it's a dream deferred. The other story is Botswana itself, the elections, and of course this tension between the two leaders. And now the former president saying he's taking government to court, he's going to sue, and using the expertise of the wife of the former British Prime Minister, Tony Blair, in this case. But also Mozambique, the elections, yes, indeed, the ruling party there got the nod, but unfortunately there are concerns in terms of how the elections were conducted. Namibia, a very, very shocking scenario there. The ruling party losing votes, even though they were able to retain the position of being first, but also the president winning elections there, but with a reduced margin. And you have a new kid in the block, the landless movement in that country, the organization that has reshaped itself as a movement that is fighting for land in that country. And we also have the Namibia EFF with 2 seats, young people. These are, for me, big stories on the continent, but particularly in the SADC region. But also Ethiopia, it looks like Prime Minister Abiy is doing very, very well in that country, winning the Nobel Peace Prize and all the changes, ensuring that there's peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Sudan, al-Bashir facing the might of the law, the man whom we thought that he was so powerful, and now he's so vulnerable and weak. And you have a situation where, unfortunately, the ordinary people are not happy about the transition. And there's hope that there will be a free and fair election at some point in time, and people will be able to choose the government that they want. But South Sudan, for me, it's a failed state. We are battling. I can't see us getting it right.
Now, my top stories from Malawi for 2019. We take a look at the 2019 tripartite elections as well as the aftermath of it. Now, Malawi held tripartite elections on May 21st, 2019, where the nation went to vote for president, parliamentarians, as well as ward councillors. Now, the results of the highly contested elections were being disputed by opposition political parties and some CSOs under the banner the Human Rights Defenders Coalition, citing unfairness and lack of transparency and irregularities that marred the elections. Now, that led to a series of events, including the human rights body staging nationwide demonstrations to force the Malawi Electoral Commission chairperson, Justice Jane Ansa, and fellow commissioners to resign with immediate effect for alleged mismanagement of the elections. Now, the demonstrations that the civil society organizations were holding persisted for months in the country, and they actually disrupted business activities in the country, thereby slowing down the Malawian economy, as well as those who were taking part of the demonstrations were being accused of looting shops and property, and these acts of violence were also reported during these protests. Now, on the same note, opposition party leaders took the elections case to court, contesting the results of the elections, and we are yet to hear the verdict from the High Court, which sat as a constitutional court, and this will be early next year. But for the first time, with everything happening in the country, this has been the first sign of mature democracy that has taken place in Malawi.
The stories that stood out for me this year is One about the fish rod scandal. We call it the fish rod scandal because a number of people, including 2 ministers, had really captured the fishing industry, which is the third biggest industry in our economy. So this exposure of a capturing of the industry has led to the arrest of 2 ministers. They are now standing accused of money laundering, fraud, and several corruption-related charges. So this is a major story. Nothing like this has happened before in Namibia. The second story is that we have had, for the first time, the ruling party's 2/3 majority has been reduced to below 2/3. And this has not happened in 25 years. So it appears the Namibian voters are now voting based on issues, and the biggest issue so far is that the economy has been performing very poorly, and perhaps the youth have just become disenchanted with such a high level of unemployment.
My 2 top stories for Zambia for the year 2019 are the electricity crisis that the country has been experiencing in the year. What has happened is that the National Power Company has been unable to generate enough electricity to meet the demand of its customers. This was caused by a partial drought that the country experienced from the 2018 to 2019 rain season. Now, the impact of this has been immense. Firstly, it started off slowly with 4 hours of power cuts to increase to 6 and then 8 and eventually 12 and now as many as 15 hours of blackouts in many parts of the country. Now, the sort of impact this has had on businesses is that many businesses have had to increase their costs. They've had to resort to using generators or in some cases power inverters, and they have been passing on their costs to the customers. The other story is when Zambian students led by the University of Zambia reacted to the xenophobic attacks in South Africa on foreign nationals living there. Now, the Zambians who reacted to those xenophobic attacks took a long protest march from the University of Zambia, walking over 15 kilometers to the South African High Commission. And in that, they were basically sending a message that Zambia and South Africa have a shared political history. On one side of it is that some of the African National Congress leaders were in exile in Zambia during the apartheid era. One of the prominent leaders who was in Zambia was Oliver Tambo, former President Thabo Mbeki, who resided in Zambia during that period. Now, the Zambian students were basically sending a message that the South Africans, given this shared history, are not supposed to be treating other Africans in the way they were treating them.
Media Monitor visited print and broadcast editors to get their feelings on what they think will likely be big stories in 2020.
How is President Ramaphosa going to ensure that he is able to turn the situation around, particularly on the issue of the economy? The second important matter is to ensure that our state-owned entities are working very well and are profitable, particularly Eskom. What transpired this year was not good for the economy of the country. And next year, President Ramaphosa and government will have to ensure that it's not business as usual.
And I would imagine the state capture will probably capture our imagination
again.
State
capture again, particularly when that report is presented to the president and to the nation. What is the chair of the commission, Deputy Chief Justice Zondo, going to say? And also the accountability and the prosecutions that are going to follow, particularly on those who have been found wanting or perhaps who are fingered in the report and who must take responsibility and perhaps accountability in terms of what transpired in South Africa.
Another thing that's dramatic likely to happen in 2020 is that we will see former President Zuma stand trial. So after everything that he has tried to stay away from his trial, I believe that 2020 is the year when we're going to see him not only plead but explain himself before the courts, and the courts eventually take a decision. Whether that trial will be concluded within 2020, I'm not certain.
I think the big story for me next year would be what is happening around President Cyril Ramaphosa's leadership and the ANC especially, because the party will then be starting to prepare for what they call the National General Council, which will be the midterm conference of the party, where they discuss policy issues and they review what they decided on at the last Congress in 2017. So I think that will be a major issue, because then the president will have to be going back and account on what they have done since those resolutions were taken in 2017. Yes, there were elections, but did they implement any of the key resolutions, like in terms of land expropriation without compensation and issues like that? So I think it's going to be a major story, and it will be an indicator as to whether by the next ANC conference in 2022, whether the president will be able to be re-elected or not. So for me, that becomes a major story for the year. And also what's happening around parastatals, especially ESCOM and SAA. The president had already said that their intention is to split ESCOM into three. Whether that will happen, whether they will be able to carry that through and be able to prevent load shedding from happening again next year, that I think is going to be a major challenge. SAA nearly collapsed, was saved by this business rescue process. That is a story to watch as to what is going to happen.
Thank you very much indeed for watching this special edition of Media Monitor. From me and the rest of the team, goodbye.